My name is Rosie Bartel, and I'm a wife, a mother, a grandmother, and an educator. And during the last 5 years, I became a person who received a MRSA staph infection through a knee replacement. And so now I'm looking at how did this happen to me, and how can I make sure this doesn't happen to a lot of other people. 5 years ago, I went into what I called a routine knee replacement. On the day when I went to have the staples removed, there was some drainage. He said, don't worry about it. Well, as the weekend went on, the drainage got worse and worse and worse. And by Monday morning, I was in a pretty bad shape. And when I went in, he said, we have a short window of time. That same afternoon, I went back into surgery. One of the things they didn't know when they went in was that the infection was a MRSA staph infection. The morning after, I was woken up by two doctors, my orthopedic doctor and a new doctor I'd never met, but an infectious disease doctor, whose first thing he said to me is, lady, you're very sick, and you have probably a 30% chance of surviving this. You have a severe MRSA staph infection. We're hoping we can save your knee, but we're not sure. And that started me on a long, long journey of 5 years, 27 surgeries, and the loss of my leg, and still not completely cured of MRSA staph infection. And my question is over and over, how did I get this? And nobody can give me a complete answer. How do the foreign particles that they say they try to keep out of operating rooms, but we know they can't keep them all out, how does that get to a wound? One of the groups I was involved with was Partners for Patients. And when I worked with that group, we did a study about how does a surgical infection happen. And one of the things we looked at was the prep that patients do, and how do they do that prep, and do we instruct them right, and is the instruction clear? The other thing they looked at seriously was hand washing, and the fact that hand washing signs don't always work, and that people can look at a hand washing sign and not wash their hands well. And so they created hand washing signs called Think Rosie. And those signs now, instead of saying wash your hands, say think about Rosie as you wash your hands, and maybe you'll be a little more careful. Then the other thing we looked at is how do foreign particles get into this operating room. We looked at the fact that they can come in on the surgeon and the surgical staff's clothing. We also talked about how many people can come in and out of this operating room during surgery. Now during orthopedic surgery, no one is allowed to come in the door once surgery begins. And along with that is we kept talking about the particles, and that, the ventilation of the operating rooms are from ceiling to floor and all of those kind of things. But the thing we never talked about is how do those particles that we know will end up on the floor from all different reasons, about people coming in and out of the OR, people bringing in things, people wearing things. We know that there's going to be particles on the floor. But we never talked about how could those particles get from the floor to the surgical site. I mean, we even talked about the fact that there's a rule in that hospital that doctors and nurses can't put their hands below the operating table. They must keep them above the operating table, just so that they can't get those particles on their hands. But yet somehow a foreign particle got in my wound to cause me to have an infection. At least that's what that's their whole goal, is that if the particle hits the floor, it stays on the floor. We finished the study. In the back of my mind, I kept thinking, okay, the particles are on the floor, but how did they get in my wound? That question kept going over and over in my head.